Hello again and welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. Of course, this is a weekly discussion forum which provides local journalists with the opportunity to engage the President on matters of national importance. I'm your host, Gomiti Gangadin. Of course, with us this morning is the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, His Excellency Brigadier David Granger. Good morning and welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
To my left, we have two journalists joining us this morning. They are Ms. Tracy Romalho from the National Communications Network and Mr. Handel Duncan from the HGP Nightly News. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
This morning, we want to focus on Guyana's domestic security and bringing the crime rate down. Your Excellency, according to Crime Chief Wendell Blanham, there has been a significant reduction in crimes, that is at least 20%. However, there seems to be a high number of interpersonal crimes being reported. How can Guyana as a society working together with the Guyana Police Force and the Social Protection Ministry and other stakeholders come together to address this situation?
I'll go with you. Half answered the question there. Mr. Blanham is correct. There has been a reduction in serious crimes, and you are right that it is not a matter for the police force alone, that various agencies have to work together, the Guyana Police Force, other arms of the state, civil society, and of course the families in the various communities. The main problem now seems to be interpersonal violence. I would say 10 years ago we were concerned with execution murders. They were murders which are criminal in the sense that they seem to be driven by the drug trade or some other form of motivation. But right now, crimes are committed by persons who know one another, husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, relatives, and it is troubling. Related to the murders are, of course, suicides, and both the suicides and the homicides point to some underlying cause in society. I did have a meeting with the members of the National Security Committee on Tuesday, and this is the very question I asked: how could we cope with interpersonal violence? I would say that there are problems at the level of the family, that we need to pay attention to what is taking place in the family, if there's any disintegration there. We need to pay attention to what is taking place in the schools, because there is violence in the schools, and this should be one of the institutions which correct faults in the domestic environment. There are problems in wider society, the way people deal with solving conflict. You know, sometimes you hear about two passengers in a minibus and the rain is coming in and somebody complains and somebody's going to end up dead. You know, it's very difficult to understand, you know, the fierceness. You see some, you know, a woman and her child father have some dispute and she ends up being stabbed 13 times. So it's not only the incidence of interpersonal violence, but it's the fiercity. You know, why go on stabbing somebody so many times? You know, after it is clear that you know the person is injured or is about to die. So something is happening in society, and I don't think the police force on its own can solve the problem. The government on its own cannot solve the problem. And I've asked the National Security Committee to work with academia to see whether sociologists and other non-governmental organizations could come together to address this problem so we can solve it at the level of the state. I am concerned about suicide. We have the highest suicide rate in the Western Hemisphere, and I am concerned with the murder rate, even though Mr. Blanham says the rate is lower than previous years. That is cold comfort. So we are onto the problem, and I expect in months to come we'll be studying the problem and working to resolve it. Forgive me for such a long answer, but it's a big problem.
That's all right, sir. Thank you. Journalists, you can now pose your questions on the topic.
Mr. President, will in this regard, as it relates to interpersonal violence, will we see your government taking a policy step toward implementing a policy in this regard?
There are policies, or you may call it strategies, to deal with suicide and other forms of interpersonal violence, I would say that some of it will have to go back to education and social action. I am not aware that there is such a policy now, but we need to start teaching conflict resolution skills, anger management skills within our schools. And I would ask that the main religious organizations, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and Baha'i faith, and even the Rastafari, I shouldn't say even, and the Rastafari faith, all 5 faiths would deal with anger management, deal with helping young people to manage relationships and to deal with conflict. I would say yes, we need to deal with it. It's a national crisis now, and we need to deal with it at a national level, not a governmental level, not an NGO level, but to bring all of the stakeholders together to deal with this problem, especially at the level of young people.
Mr. President, this is obviously something that did not started yesterday. It had to be something that was festering, and we're now seeing the manifestation in society in terms of the interpersonal violence and crime we're seeing. Would you say that we were a bit short-sighted in terms of coming up with approaches that now this is here and we now have to get together to look for solutions?
I would not admit to being short-sighted. We went through the most difficult period since independence I'd say between 2000 and 2010, or thereabouts, maybe that first decade of the new millennium. And the amount of execution murders that occurred, children in some villages, can still point to bullet holes in their houses, going to school and seeing dead bodies, or a body floating in a canal, gunfire, hearing gunfire at home when you should be doing your homework. What we're seeing now is the secondary impact. The primary impact was the death of somebody, from the violence. But we know this feeling, the secondary impact, people who witness that violence have themselves become violent. People who might have just been 5 years old in 2000 and might have seen a relative killed would now be 21 years old. And they say, okay, if I have a problem, the way to solve it is a gun. So we now have to re-educate many of the young people who witness those crimes, or who are affected by the headlines, or might have been themselves victims, or their relatives might have been victims. So what we're seeing is a secondary impact. I know it has happened in other societies, but once you endure such intense violence for so long, it is difficult to escape the consequences, the psychological consequences. So I am no psychologist, but that's my explanation, that it's not that we've ignored it, but we perhaps were unaware that the consequences would have been so damaging.
Tracy.
They said, well, if your education begins within the school and the home, but do you think that there is a need for more social workers in the school system as well?
It is now widely recognized that once there's been trauma, there should be some counseling, especially for the victims or the survivors or the very young. Because people walk around with these memories. I wouldn't describe it as social action, but I would feel that young people in schools, homes, churches need to be given the tools to deal with the problems that they face, to resolve conflict, instead of bullying somebody at school or fighting. We need to treat each other respectfully, boys and girls, and sometimes relationships between boys and girls, sexual relations, could lead to domination and of course victimization. So you might find that there are other areas in which children, young people need counseling. And as I said, in answer to Handel's first question, you would probably need to look at a multi-agency approach. You need the churches and other religious bodies, you need the schools, you need non-governmental organizations, you need to deal with the families, because children frequently imitate the behaviors of the behavior of the elders. Except in cases where children are completely abandoned. The mother might be, in the West Indies or somewhere. The father might be in the gold fields, and they're influenced by their peers. They're influenced by people of their own age group who sometimes have problems of their own. So this is an area of Guyanese society which we do not understand, and I would use 2000 as the year when things started to go downhill. And we need to look at all of the violence that occurred, the drug trafficking, the murders, the smuggling, the trafficking in persons, all the things that occurred over that period, and try to make sense of, out of it so that we can correct the errors that occurred and give our children a better opportunity to live decent lives. But a lot of things happened, and we can't pretend that it was just like a shower of rain. These things affected people deeply. A girl who's been trafficked, I remember seeing some of the victims who had been rescued and placed in another institution. It's difficult to have a conversation with them. They're damaged. They need a long, slow period of education to overcome the trauma that they face. They don't trust adults, because of what they went through, So these are not things, these are not just statistics, trafficking persons, Guyana rated A or rated B. These are human beings we're talking about.
Sir, I'm happy that you mentioned the 2000s. When you were opposition leader, I remember you speaking heavily on the compilation of that dossier into the number of killings that we had. Where do you stand presently now into a COI being held into those deaths? And when you were opposition leader in July of 2014, you expressed an alarm at the crimes that were being committed back then, and you'd call for the tightening of borders. You spoke of border security. Do you think that has some sort of relevance to today still?
Well, those are two separate issues. And the first issue, yes, information is still being compiled. As you know, we've taken action to ensure that inquests are conducted. As you know, even in the case of the Minister of Agriculture who was assassinated, the sitting Minister of the Cabinet, and there's no investigation, there's no inquest. Even magistrate's inquest wasn't conducted. Members of the family have spoken with me face to face and asked for investigations to be done, and we're proceeding in that way. As far as the second matter is concerned, Guyana has long borders, with Brazil, Suriname, Venezuela, and a long coastline of over 430 kilometers. The border with Brazil alone is over 1,100 kilometers. And yes, we do have trafficking in weapons, we do have trafficking in narcotics, and of course there's other forms of trafficking, contraband trafficking, and trafficking in persons. But unless we secure those borders, we will never be able to ensure that the rest of society, particularly those who live on the coastline, would be protected from the effects of those crimes. When a gun crime is committed in the coastline, very frequently that gun is an illegal firearm smuggled from Brazil. I'm not blaming the Brazilians. The Brazilians just happen to be the world's 5th largest exporter of small arms. And it's a fact that many of the illegal firearms are Brazilian, and we have an 1,100 kilometer border with Brazil. A situation is now taking place in Venezuela, in which there is apparently some degree of trading weapons for food. Guyana is not necessarily directly affected. I think Trinidad is suffering the worst effect, but we have had problems for most of this year along the Cuyuna and Guanamo rivers, in which there is an increase in Venezuelan roguery. You know, people just shaking down Guyanese, you know, for gold and food. So the situation in Venezuela is unhelpful to the stability in Guyana. Situation in Brazil, not that there's any disorder in Brazil. Brazil is very orderly, but the fact is that many illegal firearms have been sourced from Brazil. So yes, border security is essential if we are to maintain stability in other parts of the country. So those are the two answers to the two questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. We now want to move off of the topic. And sir, last evening you spoke on the importance of protecting the country's most vulnerable, especially its children. Only recently there was a fire at the drop-in center, and sadly we lost 2 children there. Sir, what steps are going to be taken to ensure that there is a full investigation into this matter and to ensure that corrective action is taken?
I think the fire was on Friday the 8th of July. It's very unfortunate, but it's worse than unfortunate, it's a tragedy. A commission of inquiry has been convened, and I hope to receive the preliminary report by next Friday, that is the 22nd, and the final report, you know, hopefully by the end of July. Now there are several aspects, because one, we know that there was a previous fire there, and some corrective work was done, but the building seemed not to have been ready for occupancy. And given the ages of the children, you know, one I think was 3, one was 6, they may not have been trained in responding to an emergency such as a fire. So on the one hand, you have the physical aspects, the building, the wiring, and the training. On the second side, you have what I would call the psychological or personal aspect, that is to say the conditions under which those young persons had to be separated from their family, and under which they were actually living as wards of the state. So those are the two aspects which have to be investigated. Was the building safe? Was the wiring safe? Or, you know, were people trained to respond to that emergency? And the second aspect is whether procedures were complied with for the safe custody of those children. I mean, my understanding is that the parents did consent. The parents were living, or the children were living in difficult circumstances. So on the face of it, there does not seem to me to be any belief that there was any irregularity in the circumstances under which the children ended up in that institution. So I would like to be satisfied that the children were being properly looked after, and there was a misadventure, and the important thing now is to prevent a recurrence. The important thing now is to find out what happened, and we need to ensure that answers are provided to the questions in order to prevent a recurrence. So that is what we're trying to find out what the facts are and ensure that something like that doesn't happen again.
Thank you, sir. Journalists, you can now pose your questions off of the topic.
On the same drop-in center thing, sir, on that tragedy, do you think that there should be toddlers living in a different home than from the bigger children?
What I think and what is necessary might be two different things. The general policy of the government is not to separate families. The best place for children is with their parents. Separation is a last resort, or ought to be a last resort. And it is only because children a report was made and children were in difficult circumstances, that the separation had to take place. The government doesn't go around trying to separate children from their parents. Children need the support and the love and care which can come from a family. So that is why we're trying to find out what were the circumstances under which the children had to be separated. And there's evidence that the parents agreed to the separation. But it's obviously temporarily. So it's not a matter of what I believe. The situation might have warranted temporary separation to allow the children to get the care and protection, while I believe other measures were put in place to improve the circumstances under which they're living. So let me just make that clear. It's not a question of belief. My belief is that the best place for a child is with his or her natural parents. That's the best place. But there are indications that they were living under extremely difficult circumstances.
Mr. President, the bottom line is that 2 lives were lost. There is going to be a COI, or it's being conducted.
Well, recommendations. COI, we need to get the.
Recommendations are going to come out from that. Will we see, given the gravity of this, will we see heads rolling probably?
We don't investigate matters to roll heads. We investigate matters to solve problems. What you will see coming out is the solution to the problem. Whether, as Tracy might have been asking, whether we should have different maybe implement different measures for dealing with children in difficult circumstances, and also at an institutional level, whether buildings should be provided with safer equipment, whether the supervisors should be better trained, and that type of thing. So there are 2 aspects, and we want to make sure that there's no recurrence of the tragedy.
Tracy.
Oh, Mr. President, the parking meters, City Hall and the parking meters, they say that the cabinet was going to review that, the project. What's been the outcome thus far, or if it has begun?
The municipality operates under its own regulations. It is not a department of the central government. And it is not for the central government to micromanage the municipality and decide on every container tax, every litter tax, every parking meter. So I do not believe that any attempt has been made to prevent the parking meter program from going ahead. I have not been advised that it has been embarked on in any fraudulent or an irregular manner. So once it's above board, that was the purpose of the investigation, to determine whether there was any impropriety. Once there's no impropriety, there is no reason for the central government to obstruct the municipal administration from proceeding.
Handel.
Mr. President, in times gone by, there would have been an establishment to the effect of an agriculture bank. If I'm incorrect, you can bring me back here. But an agriculture bank would have assisted farmers and so forth in getting loans so that they can carry out whatever it is that they have going for them. That was run by the government back then. Today we've got institutions like IPED and so forth. Those are not necessarily run by the government. Now, if it is we have an institution like an agriculture bank owned by the state, we will have revenue coming back, profit from the loans that are, given out and so forth. We'll have revenue, profit and so forth coming back to the state. We have institutions like IPED and so forth, they make profits, they make billions and so forth. Those monies for the state, we don't necessarily benefit extensively, as in the case if Guyana would have had an institution like an agriculture bank, where it is you lend money to farmers and you get a profit coming back to the state. Are you pursuing something like that?
A long question. Agricultural banks, even at the micro level, are not necessarily very profitable. Many of the commercial banks prefer to go into other forms of loans, maybe for building houses and buying cars, short term, high interest, and of course, individuals. Agriculture in Guyana could be a little problematic with the floods, the droughts, and sometimes insect infestation. And it's a different regime, right? It's a specialized form of banking. No, the government right now is not contemplating a new agricultural credit bank. The government will be prepared to support, private banking, which goes into agriculture and provides credit, certainly in the rice industry, in all forms of agriculture. Small farmers require some form of credit so they can buy seed material, they can pay for land preparation until the crop comes in. The problem is sometimes in agriculture the crop doesn't come in because of a drought or a flood. And of course the bank wants the money back. So we don't want farmers killing themselves because they can't repay the loans. It is something that is being considered, but I would prefer to see agricultural credit facility in partnership with private enterprise rather than another government institution. We've been that way. I regret the closing of, it's called Guy Bank, G-A-I-B-A-N-K, B-A-N-K, Guyana Agricultural Industrial Cooperative Bank. But we do not have a plan to go back into agricultural banking at this point in time.
Tracy.
Mr. President, last Friday you commissioned the farm to market road.
What's your point in
Sorry. Yes, you commissioned the farm to market road at Perico, and you lamented the CARICOM food import. Its bill, it's high, it's exorbitant. What role Guyana can play in this regard in reducing the Caribbean's food import?
I was speaking to farmers in Essequibo Island, West Demerara region, and there we have two major institutions. One is called it was the cassava mill at Hubu, and the other is the processing plant at Perico. I regretted that those two institutions were not functional. Guyana has the most land space in the entire community. Guyana and Suriname together are bigger than Germany. And I told my colleague leaders of the Caribbean community that, hey, we're bigger than Germany and we are the hinterland of the Caribbean. We have the land space. When Prime Minister Francis Stewart from Barbados was here, we went to the Rupununi, and there's a 10,000 hectare ranch in the Rupununi, near to a place called Mertazera. They call it Santa Fe. Guyana needs capital, it needs investment. Guyana needs infrastructure. In fact, much of the produce from that Rupununi, which is bigger than Costa Rica, much of the produce has to go to Brazil. Guyana needs to embrace information technology so we know what's going on in the market. Yes, Guyana is, I would say, the best placed country in the Caribbean to provide food supplies, particularly to the Eastern Caribbean, where there's a thriving hotel and hospitality industry. And we can produce any fish, any fruit, any vegetable that the hotel industry needs. But we need to do so under certain conditions, that is regularity and in accordance with certain sanitary standards. But I'm very hopeful. What we're seeing now among Caribbean leaders is a new approach to the Caribbean single market and economy. And I'm very confident that this will now become a reality. Food security for the Caribbean will become a reality. I've even encouraged some of our Caribbean leaders to stop consuming or to discourage, I can't tell them to stop, discourage the consumption of imported vegetables and use things like sweet potatoes, you know, more readily, cassava chips. So the next time you go by one of your favorite fish spots, you'll be eating sweet potato chips and bangoberry.
Thank you.
You're a White Castle man?
Kingfish. Mr. President, we just want to wish you a happy birthday in advance, given you're celebrating tomorrow, we're told.
Thank you very much. I would have a happy birthday now that you wish me.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, journalists. That just brings us to the end of this week's edition of The Public Interest. Do have a blessed day, Guyana. Goodbye.